Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and greetings to Miss Siti Masliza and to all my fellow friends. We will present Chapter 2, which is Moral Reasoning in Business Conventional Perspective, the meaning and concept, moral reasoning, and philosophical. First of all, let me introduce the presenter. The first presenter is Nur Emriani, the second presenter will be Nur Azima, the third presenter is Nur Fatima, the fourth presenter is Adi Anak Jitwil, the fifth presenter is Kamarul, and the last presenter is Fatiha, which is me. For this chapter topic outcome, students will able to differentiate between moral and legal standards, explain the following terms, which is ethical relativism, egoism, altruism, consequentialism, and deontology. 3 question approach, 5 question approach, types of justice, theory of justice, distinguish between ethical and unethical behavior based on ethical reasoning, cognitive moral development by Lawrence Kohlberg, reasoning approach, and the last one was ethical decision.
Is Nur Emriani Nabila binti Haminuddin. There will be 2 parts, which is part 1 is about the ethical philosophies and concepts and its application to business. So the first thing that we're going to learn from this topic are the difference between moral standards and legal standards. So the first point is from moral standard, moral are concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior and the goodness or badness of human character. And from legal standard, law is the system of rules that particular country or community recognize as the regulating the actions of its member, which is the people, and may enforce by the imposition of penalties such as like fine of money or going to jail. Then morality govern private and personal interactions. For legal standard, law governs society as a whole, often dealing with interaction between. So for the last point, morality demand that men should act from a sense of ethical duty, which morality has no such enforcing authority from the state, where it can be called as autonomous, which means coming from the inner life of man. However, the law demands an absolute subjection to its rules and commands, and law has enforcing authority derived from the state. It also can be called as heteronymous, which means being imposed upon men, upon the outer life of man, which is we have to follow the rules that have been derived by them. Ethical relativism is the theory that holds that morality is relative to the norms of one's culture. That is, whether an action is right or wrong depends on the moral norms of the society in which it is practiced. Where the same action may be morally right in the one of society, but it can be morally wrong in another society. Advantages of ethical relativism is that it allows for a wide variety of cultures and practices, and it also allows people to adapt ethically as the culture, knowledge, and technology change in society, where it is good and valid form of relativism. The disadvantages of ethical relativism is that truth, right and wrong, and justice are all relative. Just because a group of people think that something is right does not make it so. So the next slide is about egoism. Egoism is a theory in ethics that human beings act or should act in their own interests and desires. Egoism is opposed to altruism, which asserts that human beings should act in ways that help others. Egoism is philosophical theory in ethics which has at least 3 subtypes, which is descriptive egoism, normative egoism, and conditional egoism. Descriptive egoism contends that people always act in self-serving ways, though they may try to disguise their selfish motives. And for normative egoism, it claims people should act in self-serving ways because it is morally right. And for conditional egoism, which asserts that egoism is morally right and acceptable if it leads to morally acceptable ends, such as like self-motivated, where that action can be considered morally acceptable if they lead to the betterment of society and to the public as a whole. Altruism is the unselfish concern for other people, doing things simply out of desire to help, not because you feel obligated to out of duty, loyalty, or religious reasons. It involves acting out of concern for the well-being of other people. For sure, it shows contrasted with egoism, which claims individuals are morally obligated to serve themselves first. So there are some examples of altruism. The first one is they're doing something to help another person with no expectation on rewards, and then they're foregoing things that may bring personal benefits if they create costs for others, and then they're helping someone despite personal costs or risk. Altruism also builds social connections. For example, studies show that people who are altruistic tend to be happier, to be healthier, and to live longer. So the next slide is about consequentialism. Consequentialism is a theory that suggests an action is good or bad depending on its outcome. An action that brings about more benefits than the harm is a good, while an action that causes more harm than benefit is not. The most famous version of this theory is utilitarianism. For example, the investor's judgment based on its expected return. So if the actual return was less than the investor's expectation, then it's deemed to be bad investment decision. And if the actual return more than the investor's expectations, then it is considered a good investment decision. So the next slide is about deontology, which including universalizability, respect for rational being, and autonomy. Deontology is a theory that suggests actions are good or bad according to a clear set of rules. Its name comes from the Greek word deon, meaning duty. This ethic, where actions that obey these rules are ethical, while actions that do not are not ethical. This ethical theory is most closely associated with German philosopher Immanuel Kant. So Kant believed that ethical actions follow universal moral laws such as do not lie, do not steal, and do not cheat. Deontology is simple to apply. It just requires that people follow the rules and do their duty. This approach tends to fit well with our natural intuition about what is or isn't ethical. And then deontology is a philosophical approach that requires an ethical decision depends upon the duty, rights, and justice. So, universalizability is not a substantive moral principle but a logical feature of the moral terms. Anyone who uses such terms as right and ought is logically committed to universalizability. So universal judgment are also impartial. They are impartial because the person who makes them will be required to judge him or herself according to the same standard by which he or she judge others. If an action is moral for one person, it must be accepted as moral for everyone.
My name is Nurazima binti Ramal and I'm the second presenter. So I will proceed the presentation with respect for rational being and autonomy. Respect for rational being. The person performing the action should not see others as a means to further his own interests, but instead respect them as individuals. Kant claims human beings, they are to be treated as a person. This can be understood as not treating people as a mere resources, respecting their autonomy, rights, even choices. People should be treated with respect and have rights that should not be violated even in the face of oppression. The last one of deontology is autonomy. Autonomy is the moral right one possesses or the capacity we have in order to make decisions for oneself, providing some degree of control or power over the events that unfold within one's everyday life. Autonomy aims to protect human choice, rights, and freedom from the influence of corporation, the state, or other individuals from an ethical perspective. It essentially allows us to be our own ruler. Next, 5-question approach. 5-question approach is a decision with short-term impact and no externalities. The 5-question approach, or known as 5-box approach as Graham Tucker has called it, it involves the examination or challenge of a proposed decision through the 5 questions, which are: first, profitable; second, legal; third, fair; 4, right; 5, demonstration expected motivation, virtue, and character. If no negative response is forthcoming when the questions are first asked, an effort should be made to improve the proposed action using the 5 questions as a guide. If negative response is forthcoming when all 5 questions are asked, The decision maker can iteratively attempt to revise the proposed action to remove the negative or offset it. If the revision process is successful, the proposal will be ethical. If not, the proposal should be abandoned as unethical. These are pros and cons of 5-question approach. 5-question approach is some ethical problems are not as susceptible to examination by the 5-question approach. For example, the first question focuses on profit, which is substantially shorter terms, less comprehensive measurement tools than cost-benefit analysis. However, the 5-question framework is a useful approach to the orderly consideration of problem without externalities, and where a specific focus is desired by the decision process designer. Next, modified moral standard approach. Modified moral standard approach is a medium and long-term decision involving externalities. It is somewhat more general in focus than the 5-question approach and leads the decision maker to a more broadly based analysis of net benefit rather than only profitable as a first challenge of proposed decision. As a result, it offers a framework that is more suited to the consideration of decisions that have significant impact outside the corporation, including externalities, than the 5-question framework. These are the standards making up the moral standard approach. Firstly, utilitarian, which to maximize net benefit to society as a whole. Secondly, individual rights, to respect and protect with each person's right. Thirdly, justice, which to make sure that there is a fair distribution of benefits and burdens. Lastly, virtues, where to see the action demonstrate the motivation, virtues, and character expected. When a proposed action has been assessed against all 4 moral standards, and the relative importance of the impacts of stakeholders have been taken into account, an overall decision on the ethicality of the proposal can be taken. All 4 moral standards must be considered to ensure a comprehensive decision.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Nur Fatimah Shahira and I am the 3rd presenter. In this slide, I'm going to present about types of justice. As you can see in the slide, types of justice had been asked in this 4 pasya. Later, the other presenter will go more detail about this pasya, or you can refer to the slide later. There are 4 types of justice, mainly distributive justice, compensatory justice, retributive justice, and procedural justice. Distributive justice are more about fair distribution, compensatory justice are more about compensating people or the victim, retributive justice are more about punishment and penalties to the wrongdoers, and procedural justice are more about fair and transparent in how justice is administered. First, distributive justice, also referred as social justice, which are primarily on principles designed to cover the fair distribution of benefits and burdens of economic activity among individuals in a society. Its roots are in social order, and it is at the roots of socialism, where equality is a fundamental principle, which also means that everyone is equal. Examples of benefits are wealth, power, and freedom. Examples of burdens are burdens and duties such as taxes, and to be subjected to restrictions over one's property. Distributive justice recognizes that all members of a social society do not have the same advantages mentally, physically, and socially. Therefore, there has to be a redistribution of resources to achieve fair shares among all members of a society. Next, compensatory justice, which refers to the extent to which people are fairly compensated for their injuries by those who have injured them. For example, some argue that mine owners should compensate the workers, who is the coal mine workers, whose health has been ruined. Another example is compensation to workers who involved in an accident. Thirdly, retributive justice, also known as corrective justice. It refers to the extent to which punishments are fair and just. Those who commit certain kinds of wrongful acts, paradigmatically serious crimes, are morally deserved to suffer a proportionate punishment. For example, based on Age Prop News, Roger Ng Chong Hua carries a punishment of up to 10 years imprisonment and a fine of at least 1 million ringgit upon conviction for money laundering and other 4 charges. The last types of justice, procedural justice, concern on how justice is administered. Key aspects of a just legal system are that the procedures are fair and transparent. There should be a consistent application of the law both within the legal jurisdiction and over time. Also, justice is to be assessed based on facts of the case. This means that the information used to be assessed the various claims need to be relevant, reliable, and vividly obtained. Finally, there must be right of appeal, where the one who loses the claims should be asked a higher authority to review the case in order that any potential miscarriage is corrected. The next subtopic is theory of justice, mainly egalitarian and libertarian. Egalitarian consider three claims about equality, which is all persons have equal moral and legal standing. Next, in some contexts, it is unjust for people to be treated unequally on the basis of irrelevant traits. Thirdly, when persons' opportunities or life outcomes are unequal in some important respect, we have a reason to lessen that inequality. Equality for egalitarian are everyone should be treated the same, all human beings are equals in some fundamental respects, each person has an equal claim to society's goods and services, and the last one, everyone should have equality proportion regardless of individual differences. The last theory of justice, libertarian. Libertarian is committed to the principle that liberty is the most important political value. People do not deserve equal economic returns since they did not make the same contribution, and every reward is compensated with effort, meaning that if you want a reward, you must have an effort. The word liberty means being free to make your own choices about your own life, that what you do with your body and your property ought to be up to you. This means that people are free to choose the kind of contribution they want to make. The next subtopic, virtue ethics, golden rule, self-interest, and alignment. Virtue ethics may initially be identified as the one that emphasizes the virtues or moral character. In contrast to the approach that emphasizes duties or rules, which is the deontology theory, or that emphasizes the consequences of action, which is the consequentialism theory. Virtue ethics are like when someone in need should be helped because helping the person would be charitable or benevolent. The concept of a virtue is the concept of something that makes its possessor good. A virtuous person is a morally good, excellent, or admirable person who acts and feels as she should or he should. That's all from me. And now, the next presenter will continue the
My name is Adi Anajitwil and I am the fourth presenter. I will proceed on the next part, which is Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is the principle of treating others as one wants to be treated. It is a maxim that is found in most religions and cultures. For example, we do well to others without expecting anything in return. The most familiar version of the Golden Rule says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." This means that if we treat others in a good manner, they will treat us in a good manner too. Same goes to the other way around. Next is self-interest. Self-interest generally refers to a focus on the needs or desires, which is interest of one's self. Mainly, individual or organization will develop self-interest into actions or activities that are advantageous for them. Most of the time, actions that display self-interest are often performed out without conscious knowing. Next, we have Enlightenment. Enlightenment is an European intellectual movement of the 17th and 18th centuries in which ideas concerning God, reason, nature, and humanity were synthesized into a worldview that gained wide assent in the West and that instigated revolutionary developments in art, philosophy, and politics. Central to Enlightenment thought were the use and celebration of reason, the power by which humans understand the universe and improve their own condition. The goals of rational humanity were considered to be knowledge, freedom, and happiness. Next, we have John Rawls' Veil of Ignorance. John Rawls recognized that persons act on self-interest. Veil of ignorance basically a person does not know who they are in the real world. A society where the members do not know anything about each other's social position and background is formed. For example, Mr. A might not know the background of study or work field of Mr. B, and Mr. B doesn't know the religious background of Mr. A, and vice versa. This means that a person has a plan to get what they want out of life, a person knows what they need to make their plan work, and a person mostly stick to their plan throughout their lives even if they're never completely successful. The advantages of wealth of ignorance is that it helps to prevent people from promoting biased principles of justice towards their own combination of talents and characteristics. It also helps that the rules that are unfair and with bias will not get acknowledgement from the people or the society. Next, we have vices and virtues. Vices basically means evil doing or immoral behavior of a person, which is the opposite of virtues. Vices will negatively effects to oneself and the others. For example, being greedy, malice, drinking alcohol, taking drugs, and cruelty will give negative effect to oneself and to the people around him or her. The lives of citizens will be uneasy and unhappy when majority of the people in the community are immoral and evil. On the other hand, virtues mean behavior that shows high moral standard, good deeds and thoughts. Virtues will bring happiness and goodness to the heart of a person and is the most useful and attractive qualities in the person. For example, being kind, love, honesty, courage, integrity, and fairness. Good conduct arises from the habits that in turn can be acquired by repeated action and corrections is how we can apply virtues. I will proceed on the next part, which is ethical reasoning process. Ethical reasoning process, basically ethical reasoning pertains to the right and wrongs of human conduct. Each person has standards that are defined by their personal values which come into play when faces certain dilemmas or decisions. Practical ethical decision-making includes philosophical theories, utilitarianism, consequentialism, deontology, justice and fairness, virtue ethics, also includes ethical dilemma. Next, we have practical constraint, personal characteristic, organizational features, environmental forces, and lastly, behavior. So what are the differences between ethical and unethical behavior based on ethical reasoning? Ethical behavior is that an individual who follows the rules and abides the ethics will get considered as a person with good and healthy habits. For example, being respectful, being kind, fair, responsible, and honesty. On the other hand, unethical behavior is a person who does not obey the rules and has an unethical manners will get viewed as a person with bad and unhealthy habits. For example, being disrespectful, bad and mean, unfair, irresponsible, and dishonest. That's all from me. The next part will be presented by Muhammad Kamarul Asfar bin Qasim. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning I bid to all of you. My name is Muhammad Kamarul Asfar bin Qasim. I am the fifth presenter and I will be going to present part 2, Conventional Philosophical Approach. The first one is Cognitive Moral Development by Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg's theory proposed that there are 3 levels of moral development with each level splits into 2 stages. Kohlberg suggested that people move through this stage in a fixed order and that moral understanding is linked to cognitive development. The 3 levels of moral reasoning include pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Let's see the first level, which is the pre-conventional morality. It is shaped by the standard of adults and the consequences of following or breaking a rules. It's concerned with self with egocentric manner and it's very common among children. Stage 1, which is the obedience and punishment orientation. It is focused on the individual desire to obey rules and avoid being punished. Example, an action is perceived as morally wrong because the perpetrator is punished. The worse the punishment for the act is, the more bad the act is perceived to be. The individual will obey in order to avoid being punished. Stage 2, which is the instrumental relativist orientation. The right behavior is determined by whatever the individual believes to be in their best interests, shows a very limited interest in the needs of others, only to the point where it might further the individual's own interests. As a result, concern for others is not based on loyalty or instinct. Example, a child is asked by her parents to do a chore. Then the child asks, "What's in it for me?" And the parents offer the child incentive by giving her an allowance. Level 2, which is the conventional morality. An individual's sense of morality is tied to personal and societal relationships. Still continue to accept the rules of authority figures, but this is now due to their belief that is necessary to ensure a positive relationship and social order. Stage 3, which is the good boy and nice girl orientation. Its behavior is determined by social approval. The individuals want the approval of others and act in a way to avoid disapproval. Emphasis is placed on good behavior and people being nice to others. Stage 4, which is a law and order orientation. The individual blindly accept the rules and conventions because their importance in maintaining a functioning society. Rules are seen as being the same for everyone, and obeying rules by doing what one is supposed to do is seen as valuable and important. If one violates a law, there is an obligation and duty to uphold laws and rules. Example, I am personally against the war but will never publicly protest it on campus without the administration's permissions. Level 3 is post-conventional morality. Individuals live by their own ethical principle, which is basic human right, liberty, justice. They view rule as useful but changeable mechanisms rather than absolute dictates that must be obeyed. Stage 5, which is the social contract orientation. Individuals have different views, rights, and values. In this stage, laws are regarded as social contracts rather than rigid edicts. Individuals become more aware that while laws might exist for the good of the greatest number, there are times when they will work against the interests of particular individuals. Stage 6, which is the universal ethical principle orientation. In this stage, moral reasoning is based on abstract reasoning using universal ethical principle. Universal principle of justice is equality of human rights and respect for the person as an individual. People at this stage have developed their own set of moral guidelines, which may or may not fit the law. The principle applies to everyone. In this way, the individual acts because it is morally right to do so. If they violate those principles, they feel guilty. The next one is reasoning approach. The first one is quantitative reasoning approach. It is an application of basic mathematics such as algebra to the analysis and interpretation of real-world quantitative information in context of a discipline or interdisciplinary problem to draw conclusions that are relevant to students in their daily life. Quantitative reasoning can be found in areas such as health, economic, politics, and science. Quantitative reasoning and mathematics are intricately linked, but while mathematics is primarily discipline, quantitative reasoning is primarily a skill. Ability to understand and use quantitative information and come to a solid conclusion. It involves critical thinking skills to draw justified conclusions from facts and evidence available at hand. The importance of a quantitative reasoning. The first one is as a component of a complete education because it is one of 4 state-mandated students' learning outcomes. The second one is to solve quantitative reasoning problems and to make well-reasoned judgments derived from quantitative information in a variety of contexts. The third one is enable people to think critically about mathematical and numerical information that surrounds them. The second one is logical reasoning approach. It is the process of using a rational, systematic series of steps based on sound mathematical procedures and given statement to arrive at a conclusion. There are 3 types, which is the deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, and abductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning means using a given set of facts or data to deduce other facts by reasoning logically. It starts with the assertion of general rule and proceeds from there to guarantee specific conclusions. Deductive reasoning moves from the general rule to specific application. In deductive reasoning, if the original assertions are true, then the conclusion must be also true. Inductive reasoning generalize an information based on the pattern and trend. Inductive reasoning moves from specific to the general. Conclusions reached by the inductive method are not logically necessities. No amount of inductive evidence guarantees the conclusions. Because inductive conclusions are not logical necessities, inductive arguments are not simply true. Last but not least is abductive reasoning. It is introduced by the term guessing since conclusions drawn here are based on probabilities. Typically begins with an incomplete set of observations and proceed to likeliest possible explanation for the set. Abductive reasoning yields the kind of daily decision making that does its best with the information at hand, which often is incomplete. The third one is moral reasoning approach, which is the thinking process with the objective of determining whether an idea is right or wrong. In order to know whether something is right or wrong, one must first know what the something is intended to accomplish. Moral reasoning is also called as moral developing. The approach is important as people consistently face with moral dilemmas and conflicts. The components of moral reasoning are moral sensitivity, moral judgment, moral motivation, and moral character. Moral sensitivity is the ability to see an ethical dilemma, including how our action will affect the others. Moral judgment is the ability to reason correctly about what ought to be done in a specific situation. Moral motivation is a personal commitment to moral action, accepting responsibility for the outcome. Moral character is courageous persistence in spite of fatigue or temptation to take the easy way out.
Hi, I'm Siti Nurul Fatihah binti Johimin, and I will present ethical decision making. Ethical decision-making framework, it refers to the process of evaluating and choosing among alternatives in a manner consistent with ethical principles. The framework incorporates traditional requirements for profitability and legality, as well as requirements shown to be philosophically important and those recently demanded by stakeholders. In making ethical decisions, it is necessary to perceive and eliminate unethical options and select the best ethical alternative. Ethical decision-making framework is designed to enhance ethical reasoning by providing insight into the identification and analysis of main issues to be considered and questions or challenges to be raised. For example, philosophers have been studying which standards are important for millennia, and business ethics have recently been building on their work. This ethical decision-making framework is also designed to enhance ethical reasoning by providing approaches to combining and applying decision-relevant factors into practical action. In general, a decision or action is considered ethical or right if it conforms to certain standards. Ethical decision-making consideration. Ethical decision-making framework assess the ethicality of a proposed decision or action by examining the consequences, rights and duties affected, motivation or virtue expected, and fairness involved. As for consequences and rights and duties affected, it involves practical application of the philosophical principles of consequentialism, deontology and justice, and examined by focusing on the impact of a decision on shareholder. As for motivation or virtue expected, it involves applying what philosophers know as virtue ethics. It is vital that all these four considerations must be examined thoroughly and appropriate ethical value must be applied in the decision and its implementation if a decision or action is to be defensible ethically. Cross-reference of ethical decision-making consideration and relevant philosophical theories. For the first EDM consideration, which is well-offness and well-being, the philosophical theory is consequentialism, utilitarianism, and teleology. The next EDM consideration is respect for the right of stakeholders. The philosophical theory is deontology, which is right and duties. The third EDM consideration, which is fairness among stakeholders. The philosophical theory is categorical imperative, justice as impartiality. The last EDM consideration is expectation for character traits, virtues. The philosophical theory is virtue. specific ethical decision-making issue. The first one is different behavior in different culture, which is bravery. The philosophical theory is relativism and subjectivism. The next specific ethical decision-making issue is conflict of interest and limits of self-interest behavior. The philosophical theory is deontology, subjectivism, and egoism. An overview of ethical decision-making framework. After the preliminary decision, it will go through the SNP test and common heuristic, which is preliminary assessment. If this decision were in the newspaper, will I or my mother or my company will be proud, or golden rule? If there is no problem found, it will go straight to the final decision. But if there is problem found, it will go through the full ethical analysis, which consists of simple questions. The first simple question is consequences of the decision. It is profitable. The interest focus is to the shareholders. Does it result in greater benefit than cost? The interest focus is to the stakeholder. The next simple question is impact right. Is the impact on the legal and other personal right favorable? The interest focus is to the stakeholder. Is the decision fair to all? The interest focus is also to the stakeholder. The last simple question is motivation and behavior implied, which is does the decision demonstrate the virtue, character, and motivation expected? The interest focus is to the stakeholder. After the full ethical analysis, the problem will be found, and they will revise the decision and reassess the revised decision. If there is no problem found, it will go through the final decision. Modified moral standard approach. Modified moral standard approach was a medium and long-term decision involving externalities. It is more general and leads the decision maker to a more broadly based analysis of net benefit rather than just profitability as first challenge of proposed decision. Hence, it offers a framework that is more suited to the consideration of decisions that have significant impact outside the corporation, including externalities. Modified moral standard approach to ethical decision making. Moral standard for utilitarian, which is maximize net benefit to society as a whole. The question of the proposed decision is, does the action maximize social benefits and minimize social injuries? The next moral standard is individual right, which is respect and project. Question of the proposed decision, is the action consistent with each person's right? The third moral standard was justice, which is fair distribution of benefits and burdens. The question of the proposed decision is, will the action lead to the just distribution of benefits and burden? The last moral standard is virtues, which is motivation, virtues, and character expected. The question of the proposed decision is, does the action demonstrate the motivation, virtues, and character expected? Comprehensive approach to ethical decision making. The first consideration is well-offness or consequences. The description is the proposed decision should result in more benefit than cost. The next consideration is right, duty, or deontology. The description is the proposed decision should not offend the right of the stakeholder, including the decision maker. The next consideration is fairness or justice. The description was the distribution of benefit and burden should be fair. The last consideration is virtue expectation or virtue ethics. The description is the motivation for the decision should reflect stakeholders' expectation of virtue. So that's all for chapter 2. Now we go to the past year exam analysis. For the latest past year examination, which is February 2021, it consists of two parts, which is Part A and Part B. Part A is 20 multiple choice questions and Part B is an essay. So for this topic, in Part A, it includes in question 3, question 4, and question 5, which is modified moral standard approach, deontology, and ethical decision making. As for Part B, in question C, which is deontology and consequentialism. Next is July 2020. This topic include in Part A question 4, which is utilitarianism, in Part A question 5, which is called theory of cognitive moral development, in Part A question 6, which is altruism. In Part B, this topic include in question 2B, which is deontology. In December 2019, for Part A, this topic includes in question 1C, which is deontology, in question 2C, in cognitive moral development by Lawrence Kohlberg, in question 1C, which is egoism. In Part B, this topic includes in question 2B, which is type of justice. Next is June 2019. For Part A, this topic includes in question 1C, question 2D, and question 2C, which is deontology theory, type of justice, and John Rawls' veil of ignorance. In Part B, it includes in question 1C and question 2D, which is consequentialism and vice and virtue. In December 2018, for Part A, this topic includes in question 2C, which is cognitive moral development by Lawrence Kohlberg, in question 2D, which is ethical decision making. For Part B, this topic includes in question 1C, which is consequentialism, and question 2B, which is type of justice. Next is June 2018. For Part A, this topic includes in question 1C, question 2C, and question 2D, which is consequentialism theory, veil of ignorance, and Kohlberg cognitive moral development theory. In Part B, this question includes in question 1C, question 2B, and question 2C, which is deontology theory, type of justice, and question approach. In January 2018, for Part A, this topic include in question 1C, question 2C, and question 2D, which is deontology theory, veil of ignorance, and three-question approach. In Part B, it includes in question 1C and question 2B, which is type of justice and libertarian. Next is July 2017. For Part A, this topic includes in question 1C, which is deontology theory, in question 2C, which is virtue ethics, in question 2D, which is three-question approach. In Part B, it includes in question 2B, which is distributive justice. Next is December 2016. For this chapter in Part A, it includes in question 1C, which is golden rule, in question 2D, which is deontology theory. In Part B, it includes in question 1C, which is deontology theory and consequentialism theory. In June 2016, in Part A, this topic includes in question 1C, which is theological theory, in question 2C, which is virtue ethics, and in question 1A, which is consequentialism. For Part B, this topic includes in question 1B, which is Kohlberg cognitive moral development theory, and question 2C, which is type of justice. That's all from us. Thank you.